Welcome everyone to our masterclass. This is Recreating During Fire Season with Outdoor Alliance. I have a whole crew of people here to talk about wildfires, policy, as well as what to do after a wildfire. So I'm excited to jump into it. So first, I'm Matt Madick. I am a marketing manager at onX Backcountry, and I like getting out and hiking and backcountry skiing and exploring, and I've been feeling the impacts of fire locally with 2 fires in the last 5 years, burning pretty close to my house and impacting I-70 every time it rains, it feels like, and closing the Glenwood Canyon. So that's my fire story. And Jamie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Jamie Irvin. I'm the policy associate with Outdoor Alliance. We are a national coalition of the advocacy organizations representing human-powered outdoor recreation. So that's climbers, mountaineers, surfers, backcountry skiers, mountain bikers, whitewater paddlers. And we all work together on policy issues related to public lands. And I am a rock climber and do basically all the other human-powered sports poorly. But yeah, based in Asheville, North Carolina. Good to be here.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks for joining. We also have Dylan on the call. Dylan, quick intro.
Hi, y'all. I'm Dylan Osleger. I worked with Outdoor Alliance on this white paper from my position as the head of Sage Trail Alliance. We're a nonprofit trail stewardship that takes care of about 320 miles of trail across the central coast of California. And then I do national trail stewardship underneath the guise of Specialized Bicycles and Rafa Clothing. But Sage itself is like any other stewardship. We take care of trails, campgrounds, historic areas, you name it, and try and get people outdoors.
Nice. Thanks for all you do, both digging in the dirt and fighting for access. And we also have Nicole on the call.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nicole. I am communications and marketing with Outdoor Alliance. I am calling in from Oregon today, where we are being affected by 2 pretty close wildfires. And as far as recreation, I am a hiker, biker, backpacker, backcountry skier.
Heck yeah. All right. So what's on the docket today? This is a slide I didn't update. But we're going to go over an introduction into the organizations we're currently talking with, as well as onX. We are going to go through a quick onX Backcountry demo and how to use our fire layers to plan around your recreation and to plan a contingency plan. And then we're also going to go into the different policies and everything, as well as how to participate in a restoration after a fire has occurred to make sure trails come back to life. And then at the end, we're going to do a giveaway and a Q&A as well. So keep those questions coming. Sweet. So if you do not currently have onX Backcountry, this link will give you a 30% discount for attending our masterclass tonight. So it's really helpful if you have this, because we'll be sending out links and the route plan from our thing today. So it'll be cool to showcase some of those tools and let you guys follow along as we work through this. So here is your chance. All right. Nicole, do you want to give a quick introduction into Outdoor Alliance?
Sure. Jamie also did a really good job introducing us. We are a coalition of 10 activity-specific member orgs. And what we do is we advocate for policy in Washington, D.C., as well as where you live, for access to outdoor recreation, protection of public lands. And our goal is to harness you guys, the community, as recreationists, to help us get legislation passed to improve the outdoor recreation experience.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Dylan, I'm going to put you on the spot too to talk a little bit more about Sage Trail Alliance.
Yeah, sure. So Sage was founded in 1988, before I came around. And I am just one in a long line of Sisyphusian characters who have taken on taking care of the trails in the central coast of California. We do about 8,000 to 10,000 hours of volunteer trail maintenance a year, plus a full staff of 7. Takes care of trails across U.S. Forest Service lands, BLM, OHV, state parks, and even land trusts. And it's all kind of a way of how do you get trails and outdoor access to the most people possible. And that includes, the folks of downtown Santa Barbara, which is fantastic, but it also includes the agricultural communities of San Ynez or working class communities of Ventura. So it's really just about how do you share nature and instill a value of conservation and let people kind of make their own journey.
Thank you, Dylan and crew, for all you do. Awesome. So just a quick intro into onX if you are not familiar with us. onX was founded in 2009 as a hunting app. And specifically, it was a SD card that would be inserted into like Garmin external devices. And as technology got better and smartphones got smarter, we created a standalone hunting app and built that technology from the ground up. And once we established those maps, we said, well, what else can we do with it and who else can benefit from it? And that's where onX Off-Road and onX Backcountry came into play, building, really purpose-built maps that are just simple, streamlined, and built for these different user groups. And onX Backcountry in particular is designed for your hikers, your backcountry skiers, your bikers, and all of your human-powered activities. And a couple other things we have, we're a multi-season app. We have a trail mode and a snow mode that cater the experience directly to those different activity types. We have a multitude of trails, guidebooks, offline, and all of this stuff works offline. So as you're out into the backcountry, away from service, you can go with confidence and know where you're going. And we also have public land ownership, private land ownership boundaries, so you know exactly whose land you're standing on. And GPS tracking, and you can build your own custom routes, which I'll be showing in this demo a little bit as well. And if you've been experiencing onX Backcountry for a while, there's a handful of new features that we have been rolling out lately as we're constantly improving this app. The first one is trip reports that came out pretty recently, and that's our new user-generated content section that you can actually inform other users of what the current trail status is like. Is there trees blocking it? Is there is it muddy? Is it closed? Is there still snow? There are all these different signals you can send to other hikers to give them information before they head out into the field. And you can also use that information on your own as you're getting the beta from other people. We've also over the summer improved our 3D on iOS, so it creates a transformative experience when you're on your app and you can actually see everything you're looking at and look at these routes in 3D. And then for our elite users, we have a recent imagery feature, which shows it shows recent imagery from the sky from 2-week intervals. So you can actually see, like, is there still snow on this mountain that I want to climb? Or, is this reservoir full? There's a lot of like interesting things you can see by looking at this stuff on a real-time basis. So with that, I'm going to jump in onX Backcountry and just showcase a little bit of the functions that we have in the app that can help you navigate the fire season. So when you first come to the app, you might have a bunch of these layers turned off. So I just want to showcase, like, you're coming in kind of with a blank experience. This is what you can expect. So the first thing is your activity mode that I like to showcase. So this is where you can change between your trail mode and your snow mode. So, switching this kind of caters the things you can see in this folder to the season that you're looking to recreate on. So if you're in the backcountry ski world, you're going to want to be in snow mode because that'll unlock and show a lot of the different content that's relevant to that. But since there is not snow on the ground and most people have hung up their skis for the year, we are in trail mode. So I want to showcase too all of the different layers that we have that are related to fire, because we actually have a bunch of them. So first we have the active wildfires layer. And when you turn this on, you can see just how many fires are burning throughout the United States and Canada right now. And then as you get closer, I'm just picking a random dot, you can actually see a polygon of, where they currently are, what areas they're impacting. And if you click on them, you can get some additional information such as current acreage, percent contained, and a little bit of a description from them. So this can really help contextualize, like, you heard about a fire burning somewhere. This is how you look at it and say, like, where is it actually impacting? Panning out a little bit, we also have historic wildfires. And as you could see, like, those yellow ones over here ticked on. So this will show you evidence of fires from the past. So, if there's been fires in the past couple of years, that could impact the quality of your trails. It can, show you areas that are like pretty scorched earth still, if it's been only a few years after a fire, and it can give you that additional context as you're going about things. We also have air quality layers. So when you turn this one on, it'll show you the current air quality in these different areas. And you can see in Canada, there's some areas with pretty bad air quality right now, as well as down here in Oregon. And then we also have a smoke forecast layer. I like using this one in conjunction with the wildfire air quality layer, because this gives you a better perspective of like where these smoke plumes are moving. And we source this information from Air Now. So these are all different pieces that can help you plan a hike and plan to recreate in an area that's away from poor air quality. Yeah, so those are the main fire layers. We also have a handful of tools that I'm going to show in depth as we go through this presentation. We have this route builder tool that lets you build a customized route that will snap to different trails as you're working through it. We have a line tool that allows you to draw a line between 2 points or link a multi-point line together to calculate distance. We have a draw shape tool that allows you to create a polygon to either mark an area that you want to be in or that you don't want to be in. And then you can drop waypoints. You can actually see that I have a bunch over here. This is actually from a prior masterclass. But you can see, like, if you want to mark campsites or points of interest, you can actually mark these here. And you can even include photos that you can, remember what these campsites look like if you're going again, or that you can share with your friends when you're sharing content between other onX users. This is the section right here where you can change your zoom. You can also over here shift between your base maps. So if you like topo maps, or you'd prefer to see topo maps for what you're looking at, you can toggle that over here. These are your satellite maps. And then this is your hybrid map as well. So that overlays the topo lines on the satellite imagery. And then let's go into satellite. This next feature right here is that elite recent imagery feature that I was talking about earlier. And actually, I'm curious about this one. Because this is still had snow on it last time I was over here. We can see, is there still snow on Snowmass Mountain? And that's where you toggle on the recent imagery right here. And you can see currently, like, is there still snow? And then you can see the date range down here. So the satellite imagery for this was taken between August 7th and July 24th. And you can actually backdate it and see how that's melted out throughout the summer. The snow is just really holding on in Snowmass. So yeah, there's that feature. And then all of the stuff that you create when you're building your routes, you're dropping your waypoints, etc., lives here in this My Content section, which I'll go a little bit more into detail when we go into it and build the route. So cool. And I wanted to use this practically and talk about some of the current wildfires that are going on in the United States. Zooming out, I got all twisty-turvy since I started spinning it. But I want to start in Hawaii because my heart breaks for what's going on over there. But yeah, if you're curious, like the beauty of this tool is it demystifies fires and where they're burning, right? Like you heard about the headlines from Lahaina and just what's been going on over there, but you can actually see the extent of where these fires are burning with our active fires layer. So like, this is just a visual indicator of like being able to see the extent of the damage and just how bad things are over there. So send support any way you can to that community because they need it. Then we'll go back to the US over here. As I'm going through here. So we have 2 other fires that are marked. Nicole, you already brought up that you live very close to this fire, the Bedrock Fire. So this is a good example because of all the different, you can see the different trails and the different recreation areas that this fire is affecting. But Nicole, like what are some of the areas that are popular in that area that are affected, and how's that impacted recreation?
Yeah, so Eugene itself in the state of Oregon is probably our second biggest metropolitan area. And this particular area, which we call Fall Creek, has an abundance of outdoor recreation. So you have fishing and camping and hiking and bike trails. And this particular fire, unfortunately, was started in a campground. So it is assumed to be human caused. And so everything that we're covering here today from Jamie and both Dylan, like really lends to being prepared before you go out. And this time of year, what you can do to prevent these things from happening in these particular areas. But another thing to think about too is like, these are rural communities. So not only like, can we not recreate there because there's a fire, but a lot of the towns around there, they rely on the outdoor recreation that comes into that area. So everything from gas stations to like where you buy your snacks, and obviously like camp hosts and the campgrounds. So with a fire this size, there's a lot of recreation shut down, and it keeps a lot of people out of the area, which obviously we shouldn't be in the area, but there's also these long-term impacts, which Jamie and Dylan will talk about.
Nice, thank you, Nicole. And then the other one, Dylan, I'm going to have you talk about the, I keep forgetting the name of this one.
You want to hop over to the flat fire?
The flat fire, yes.
Yeah, sure. So like southwestern Oregon, California border, along the Rogue River there. That one again, human caused. And yeah, I guess a good note here, 75 to 85% of wildfires on public lands usually are human caused, which is just kind of another part of stewardship in its whole realm. And onX has a pretty good page as far as stewardship goes, and kind of talks about leave no trace and understanding the intricacies of wildfire. But yeah, this is kind of a multifaceted fire. It started, almost a month ago, not quite, from shooting range. This one, unfortunately, is taking place on trails that just got a facelift last year. About $60,000 from grant funding went into restoring a few trails right up there on that ridgeline that you can see. And that funding took, probably about 3 years to get. And those trails host mountain biking. They host a 100-mile running race. And it'll take another couple of years for them to be brought back. And in the same vein, that is causing issues with sedimentation to the Rogue River, which is a multi-million-dollar economic driver. So the Rogue right now will see some impacts and some closures to its fishing season for late summer and fall. So a lot of folks won't be fly fishing or fishing out of that estuary where it meets the ocean for steelhead come fall. It's just kind of another part of wildfire restoration down the line.
Yeah, and that's the number one thing to kind of take from this webinar today is that, us as recreationalists have like a lot of different places to play in this, right? Like it's about being responsible and not being the one to start a wildfire. It's about evaluating the impact to the local economies and figuring out like how you can support when they're down in a place you love. And it's also about contributing after the fire and how can you help the restoration of these areas. Well, sweet. So I'm going to dive into just like the demo and use a hypothetical situation. And in this situation, like I'm going to try to showcase, showcase Encrested Butte, kind of based on true events, but fictionalized, like most good TV movies are. And I'll turn off these layers just to kind of accommodate that. Actually, I'll turn it back on for 1 second. Because there was a wildfire in Crested Butte. There it is, marked it, of course. So that'll be the case study. So yeah, like the first thing too, when you're planning a backpacking trip that you want to know, taking fires out of the equation is, how far do you need to go? What is your total distance? What is your total elevation? And get an estimate on like, how long it's going to take you to accomplish this, right? So one of the areas that I was looking at that I would love to hike is this trail right here. And if we click it, it'll give us actually a bunch of information about it. So I'll actually show you this card. This is the new trail reports feature that I was telling you about. So there's actually no trail reports for this trail, but I'll show you what it looks like as if you're submitting it. So you add a trail report. You can select the day that you were there. You can select the time of day that you were there. So and then what activity you were doing. So we're going to hike and backpack. And then you can either say, hey, it's all clear, the trail's dry, there's no down trees, anything like that. The trail is closed, you know, hey, like this area is not open yet, there's still snow, it's impassable. Or some issues, like this is the one that I think is like super valuable, right? And then you can actually contextualize like what some of these issues are and like inform people on in terms of like what they actually are. So what's the condition of the trail? Is it dry? Is it wet? Is it muddy? And then did you observe anything else like down trees? There was rockfall, there was high water and some big stream crossings. Like you can report all of that in the onX Backcountry app and give that information to people in the future. And then also how busy the trail was. So that's like another piece in terms of planning that we're going to start integrating with these trail reports. I won't submit that one because it would not be true. So sweet. Yeah. Like as you're in this card, like you get this idea of like, okay, this is 13 miles. You know, you're going to climb almost 5,000 vertical feet and lose about 4,200 vertical feet. And then there's an estimated time here. So close to 8 hours of hiking. And then you can see this route type too. This is really important. And I'm sure a lot of you have gotten into this situation in the past before with like looking at a route and saying it's only supposed to be 4 miles. Why is it 8? And you're like, oh, it was point to point, not out and back, right? Like I've made that mistake before when looking at like an all trails. So always make sure you're looking at that and also looking at these arrows on the trail. That'll also be an indicator of what direction the trail is going and if it's out and back. You can also see your elevation band here, and you can see like in terms of like where the steep parts will be, that's where they turn red. And you know where the elevation climbs are. So you start a little bit flat and then you just keep climbing, and then a really steep descent as you go into this next valley over here. I'll put this in 3D because it looks cool. Sweet. And then you get your photos too. So you can see, man, that looks pretty. I really need to check that out next time I'm in the Crested Butte area. And yeah, the one drawback with this too, right, is, okay, we know how much time it's going to take to go on this particular trail, but then it kicks you out over here, right? So like, how do we know how to get back and what distance and elevation that'll be? So, you know, we also have this information in the app as well. Similar experience. It's got all that too, but as you can see, this trail like extends further than the turn if we want to go in this simple loop and go back to our car. And that's where the route builder really comes in handy. So I will start breaking into that. So as I always say, the adventure always begins at the car and determining like where you can actually park. And that's like one of the beauties of using like really detailed satellite maps is you can see like physically, you know, is there evidence of a parking lot? Like there's a car here that looks pretty good. There's another parking lot over here that looks pretty big. And just evaluating like also using the public land boundaries, right? Like you can see over here, this is some private land. If you click it, you can actually see who owns it and what their tax addresses are. So it's awesome to just like be able to know like, hey, I'm not going to be trespassing on someone else's property and stuff like that. So I think this is a pretty good place to start. So what I'm going to do here is put our first waypoint. I'm going to drop this, make it our parking area, call it parking. And then also I like adding things to folders. This makes it so much easier to share. So we're going to call it Crested Butte. And that way, like as you're telling your friends and getting your friends ready for this adventure that you're planning, you can send them all the information that we're about to build in one link. Oh, cancel. So now that we've determined parking, we are going to start building our route. So we're going to go down the road a little bit here because we want to link up at the end of this trail. That's the goal. And then we're going to use Route Builder. So if you click here, you'll see the route starts following the trail, right? So as you keep clicking, you start getting those metrics over here of how much distance have I traveled? How much elevation have I gained? And that allows you to like start piecing this together as you're going down the trail. And you keep going. I'll zoom out and do this a little quicker since we're going to conquer quite a few miles here. Hold on. And if you ever make a mistake like I just did, you can hit this undo button and it'll undo it. And I saw a comment in here as well about what happens if what's happening now is happening to you. The solution is we're working on like making sure that a lot of these trail networks actually like touch at the end of it, and some of them don't. So one of the things too is like if you ever find yourself and it's just not snapping to where you want it to go, you can go over here and use this point draw feature. So if you click the point draw, that allows you to just like break away from the magnetized routes and see if you can get yourself on the route again. So I just did point draw, went back to snap to, and I'll see if this connects with this trail. And like this one is still being a little stubborn, I think, until it gets to this point. So like it's always good to have that like in your back pocket. Just go into the point draw, clicking a little bit here. And, as we get our geometries better and better, this problem is starting to solve itself. But if you ever run into the situation, it's good to know how to kind of get around it, right? So now we're back on trail, and we're going to continue up this trail. All right. So we're just going to keep going around here, kind of speeding up things. We've gone 5 miles now. We've climbed 2,500 feet. And now we're getting up to Storm Pass, which hits 12,355 feet. So this is where your climb's going to be. And you can see as you're piecing this together, right? Like, this is the elevation that you're gaining. And you can actually see that. You can go into 3D and just, visualize the Sufferfest, right? So like this also comes into play with like, how far do you want to go when you're backpacking? Like, do you want to turn this into like a 3-day backpacking trip? A 2-day backpacking trip? Like how fast do you and your crew move? Like all this can play into your, role. So like one of the things too, is if you're trying to get your first night and be a little mellow, like maybe you want to set up camp down here in this valley for the first night before trying to ascend this pass, because you're definitely not going to sleep at 12,000 feet. So that's just a piece to consider. And I will actually try to, once I piece this together, I'll say like, let's break it out into like divvy up the trail. So we're just going to continue with just the general plan right here, continue over these passes, and then bam, we're back in the valley. We're going around. And then this is where we hit that turn, right? So like, this is our first choice, right? When you hit a trail and you're like, there's a trail that goes this way, there's a trail that goes this way, there's a trail that goes this way. So this is like a good idea on your map to like make sure you have all this figured out. We're going to continue over on the low line trail to get back to the car. So just bringing it back out, looking at where this goes. You can actually see, where's the car? So the car is all the way back over here. So we still have quite a while to go on this backpacking trip. So we're definitely going to want to break it into a couple days. Sweet. And then one other thing too that I like to do, actually I won't do that now. And then sometimes if you're having like issues, like, oh, this one's working, beautiful. Yeah, so like just staying on your intended route, right? Like continuing through here. Oh, and see, I made a mistake. Things bumped the wrong way. You can fix it. Yeah, and when you get into these corners, like I think there's just that like little section where it doesn't quite connect. So you go back to that point draw tool, you demagnetize, go back to snap to, then you're right on track again. Cool.
The other thing that I like to do too in the app before I go on trips, especially with like dispersed camping, for example, and also backpacking trips, is you can just download the map area. So you have an option to do like a 5 mile radius or a 10-mile radius. So even if you don't decide to go ahead and record a route like this before you go out, like having those maps downloaded in your phone prior that you can access anytime are super valuable if you should have your plans change.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I'll definitely talk about that a little bit too, as we work through here. It's interesting. There's kind of a break in the geometry. So I'm just going to follow this guy since it's snapping to it, just for the sake of this presentation. And sorry, it's almost there. So you can see it's like a little bit finicky, but there's workarounds, right? And we expect this to just continue to be better and better as we continue to iterate on our trail geometries here. But there it is. So I'm actually just going to save this. So we are looking at a 24-mile backpacking trip with like 5,600 feet of vertical. That's a long trip. So I'm also going to add that to our folder right here. And then, yeah, I touched a little bit on like mileage in terms of backpacking, and like, let's say you have a full weekend, 2 nights on the trail, and you need to kind of like break it up. So like 20, let's just say 25 miles, like maybe try to move like 7 miles a day. So if it were me, I would probably want to set up camp. And like, as you can see, I'm hovering over this, whoa, gotta zoom out a little bit, but I'm hovering over this, like this chart, the elevation chart, and it will show me the distance, as well as the elevation of where I'm traveling. So just being like, okay, like, you know, where should we set up camp? What does 6 miles in look like? Other 6 miles. So yeah, like, let's say we want to go 7 miles in the first day, then we're going to want to camp somewhere in this valley, drop a waypoint. That looks pretty good. We'll call this camp. Night 1. Put that in our folder. Sweet. Save it. Click on this one too. Go back to this route again. Showing more from the above. We're going to want to go 7 miles. So like, let's look at what 14 miles looks like. That's right around that trail junction. So, and again, I like looking at here too and just saying like, is there evidence of like other campsites? Because that can help you mitigate your impact if you're like occupying a campsite that already exists. And for the sake of this one, I'll just put one here. This looks like a pretty flat and open area. Night 2. And then looking at the third night or the third day of hiking, it'll be pretty long, but it's flatter. So we can try to go like another, let's just say you really want to make it out. And then, you know, night 3, you don't have as much elevation gains. So you're really just going to crank, make it back to your car. So here comes our hypothetical situation. Let's say you spent 1 night on the trail, you're camped over here. You spent the second night over here. And then, you know, as you're setting up camp, I'm going to turn on the active wildfires again and show the current fire that's burning, called the Lowline Fire in Crested Butte. So this is an example. There's actually hikers who are, I don't know if they're on this exact trail, but they were actually rescued via helicopter from the backcountry outside of Crested Butte as a result of this fire. So this is something that, like, let's say, you know, this fire is going directly through the route that we had planned. So what do you do, right? And if you're paranoid like me, maybe not so much about fires, but just knowing general areas, like having a backup plan probably isn't the worst idea. Like being more familiar with the trail networks in this area isn't a bad idea. So for us, the escape plan right here is from our night 2 camp, determining like, where's the nearest place that we can go and hit a road and get out of here. So there's a lot to consider with this. And one thing that's really important to note too, is that if you're out of service, our active wildfires layer is not going to be able to update just because there's no connection to the data source when you're out there. So like when you're actually in the field, like, you know, if you do have service, like you can probably get it to update and let you know a little bit about where the fire is. But you know, you're going to have to use a handful of your real world senses as well to like navigate best practices. So one thing too is determining wind, right? So like if you're standing here and you're looking at a fire that's burning over here, one of the things you want to consider is if it's very windy and the wind is blowing in a certain direction, that's where the fire is going to go as well. So like if the winds are blowing very strongly north over here, you might want to factor that into your consideration as well. Just being like, the fire's over here. We need to head, you know, we need to try to find a different path or really hurry before it gets over there. But like, you know, you're going to have to use a lot of your common sense. This app will only help you so much, but what it can do is help you with a plan. So when you download your offline maps, you will have these trails and this trail network downloaded onto your phone. So I always make sure, I'll show the offlining process in a little bit, but like make sure that you have like your trail downloaded really well, and also like break it out a bit, like expand your horizon and make sure that you're, you know, finding what you're looking for. And I think this is our best bet to get out of here, is hitting this road over here. So you can see this is Ohio Creek Road. You know, you can actually look at maps and try to determine, like, you know, you probably won't be able to see where the fire is, on the map, but like if you're seeing smoke in this area, you can try to place it and say like, you know, even if we make it to this road, is there still access out? I think this one would be okay. And then there's also, you know, Ohio Pass, which goes up and over Kevlar Pass. So this route actually would have multiple different ways for vehicles to access you and hopefully pick you up. Or, you know, at the very least being near a road is a closer sign to civilization than wandering in the woods and you know, having an issue here. So if you're very concerned, you really want to calculate this, like what's my escape plan? Like let's create a route for the plan B, right? So we're going to go back into the route builder. We're going to go to snap to, and we're going to start clicking along this route over here. Nice, it's all matching beautifully. We're following these trails. And then bam, this goes to your parking lot and your, you know, your plan B here. So that is 5.7 miles to freedom. You can see you're only gaining 381 feet and you're going down most of the way. So almost 1,000 foot down. So hopefully this is a good route to hightail it and get out of harm's way. So we'll put this as our plan B. We'll make it pink. We'll add to our folder and we'll save it. All right. So now that we have our plan, one of the things I want to do is share the folder. So I've been meticulously putting everything into this Crested Butte folder that I've created in onX. If you're less meticulous, one of my life hacks is going to this My Content section, hitting select, and then you can highlight like by clicking all the different points. So if you're like, you know, you forget to put things in a folder, there's no worries. You can just like make sure all your stuff is selected. You can see it over here, and then you can hit the add to folder and put it in your folder. Conversely, you can hit this export button, and that'll give you a GPX file or a KML file if you like having your Garmin watch all synced with your GPX files. If your friend is using a different app, et cetera. There's a lot of reasons for these. But then if you're an onX user and your friends are onX users, it's even easier because you just go to your folder and then you hit share. And when you hit share, this creates a view-only file that people can interact with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw this in the chat. And if you all click that, you can all access the file that we just spent a little bit of time building. Crew, is there anything that you think I should mention in terms of escaping from a wildfire? I don't have a lot of experience with that, so. I'll take that as a no. Cool. Awesome. So the last thing I want to show is just how to make sure you're ready for the field. So as I talked before about the offline maps, when I'm planning on my desktop computer, which is my preferred way to plan, you also need to make sure that your phone is ready for the event and that your phone is set up for it. So we make it really easy. Your onX account syncs everything you do on your desktop and any other device you're signed in all across that. You just need to be in service when you're playing with it. So all the GPX files and everything will be sent over to my device. But I also like queuing up my offline maps for this. So over here, what you can do on the web map is actually like set everything up so you just have to hit a button when you're on your phone to download it. So we do new offline map. Medium resolution is usually fine for me. Like if you really want to get very close, you can do the high. And I like using that for backcountry skiing just because I really like seeing exactly where trees are and everything, even when I'm offline. But that will take up more space on your phone. Like you can see there's actually an estimate of your download size. And then this allows you to like set your area. So like even if you want to do a high resolution map, you can actually set it up. This will be almost a gig if I download this, or 3.8 gigs. So that's a pretty big map. So one of the other ways I like doing it too is that I'll do high for the like important parts. Like, you know, let's say I want like this section to really be dialed. I can download this one. It's called Crested Butte. Okay, got it. And this is the warning, like you're not done yet. If you just do this, your phone's not going to be ready to go in the field. But then you can also like combine your maps. So like I will often do like a medium resolution right here and just like get most of the stuff I'm actually going into. CB2. And then if you even wanted to, and you know, the strength in this with the low resolution is the lines and the routes. Like that's where these are really strong. Like the satellite imagery won't be as crisp, but you know, the view will be better. So you can actually pan out a lot larger and encapsulate a much larger area with a much smaller footprint in terms of your phone battery. So cool, we got all three of those. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna switch to my phone. Hopefully this works. 1 second here. Stop share. All right, I think you can see my screen, right? Sweet. So yeah, now I'm on my phone and you can see everything we just worked on is right here. This is the route. This is the plan. This is the beta. So we have the red line is our intended backpacking route and the purple line is our escape route. So now that I have this, just making sure that I have the maps offline. So offline maps right here, click on that. And then you can see these three buttons up here that aren't green. Those are the ones I queued up for download. So we hit 1, 2, 3, give it a second to download. This one's the big one. Hopefully it doesn't take that long. And yeah, like once these have downloaded, I'm like obsessed with making sure they're actually going to work for me when I'm offline. So up here next to this new map button, there's this go offline button. So what this does is it basically takes the app and says you aren't going to use service right now. So like it deactivates its ability to reach for service. And then you can zoom in and just be like, okay, these are actually working. You know, these maps are actually working. You can flip between your satellite maps. And this is all offline. So like, this is how detailed these maps can be on your phone when you're out in the field. And this can really help you when you're trying to find that perfect campsite or really get granular with like what you're walking through. So yeah, with that concludes the onX Backcountry demo. I'll bring my screen back up here shortly. All right, and Jamie, do you want to take it away for fire ecology in the Western forests?
Sure, that was cool. I learned a lot from that.
Oh,
I'm
thanks.
actually not an onX user, but now I maybe want to be. Yeah, thanks, guys. Again, I'm Jamie Irvin. I'm with Outdoor Alliance, and I'm going to talk just a little bit about fire ecology in this report we just put out, and how fire affects forest landscapes in particular that we might visit. The goal being to provide a little bit of ecological context for what you might see when you're out recreating using the onX app. So let's see, next slide, Matt. So the connection that we have to onX on this particular issue is that I just helped write, and Outdoor Alliance just released this report on wildfire and outdoor recreation in the Western US. And I'm going to summarize a little bit about this report right now. I have a little bit of a background in forest ecology and worked on wildfire issues prior to working for OA, and specifically out in California and the Sierra Nevada. And when I started, there was this sense among the Outdoor Alliance staff that like wildfire was getting to be this bigger and bigger issue in how we consider recreation and how we plan for getting outside and what we see when we go out onto public lands. So we decided to put a bunch of info together into this paper, which maybe there's a link in the chat or something like that. It's still right up on outdooralliance.org. The message of the paper is something along the lines of like, you know, you're not imagining things. Wildfires have been getting worse, right? Like the summers we have are smokier and more fiery than they were 10, 20 years ago. But wildfires don't necessarily have to be bad in this way. And fire plays an important natural ecological role, and restoring fire to landscapes throughout the West is a big part of the solution. So we tried to put this all together in this paper and talk a little bit about how it all connects to recreation. And I noticed in the chat some fairly educated sounding questions about fire. So clearly some of the people on this are, pretty into this issue or maybe have worked in it. And the goal of the paper wasn't necessarily to bring new info to light, but more just to synthesize fire science in a way that was accessible to our community and relevant to recreation. And reason for doing that, one, is an educational tool for the recreation community, but also we spend a lot of time tracking policy in Washington, D.C. And if you go to a hearing in D.C. and listen to people talk about wildfire and what are the problems and what are the solutions, there's not a lot of agreement about what the problem even is or what needs to be done about it, right? There's a lot of people saying this is all about climate change. A lot of people saying this is all about we're not logging enough, or we're not building houses in the right way. And it's a pretty complicated issue, and all of these things are interconnected and they influence how we experience fire. So next slide. So cool. I'm going to spend maybe quite a bit of time on this one slide. And I should say all of these images I've got here were shared with me by this professor, Paul Hesburgh at University of Washington. And they're in various published papers and things. And Paul shared them with me to use for our fire paper. And I just using them here as a tool. I think they tell a good story. But if you want to hear someone more credible than me talk about the same issue with some of these same images, you can Google Paul, and he gave a great TED talk on this issue that's a little longer. That's totally worth watching. But so the point of showing this here, right, on the top image, that's an historic photo from the National Archives of some forest southeast of Mount Rainier from, I think it's 1936. And then there's a photo of the same exact spot that was taken by this guy, Paul knows, John Marshall, in 2013. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how these two images are different. But so historically, in Western US forests, fire was pretty common. Almost all forest landscapes in the West evolved with fire of some kind, and that fire created habitat for plants and animals. It created kind of a patchy, diverse landscape, and it created conditions that allowed fire to burn in different ways. So in drier forests like ponderosa pine, you might see in like the Front Range of Colorado or in the lower elevations of the Sierra Nevada, these were frequent low intensity fires. There was fire moving across the surface of the forest, burning up pine needles and what we call surface fuels every few years. With fire return interval, these forests were seeing fire every 5 to 10 years or so. And then on a spectrum up to wetter forests, so wetter, colder places like high in the Rockies or, in the Pacific Northwest, that these were less frequent, moderate to high severity fires. So there was more of a role for burning up trees in the forest canopy, and fire created this mosaic or kind of patchwork of different burned and unburned areas that created a lot of diversity across the landscape. And fires in this time, we're talking more than 200 years ago, were either ignited by lightning or lit by indigenous peoples. So if you look in that top image, just think about like all the different forest conditions you're seeing. In the bottom kind of left of the image, you can see a bunch of open areas. You can see some big trees and big clumps. You can see some hardwood forests kind of over down to the right, I think. And just generally a lot of diversity. And if a fire was all sorts of evidence of fire in that image, and all sorts of things that might slow a fire down if it was moving or cause it to burn in different ways, right? So that's the historic landscape. And some decisions we've made and things we've done through management over the last 200 years have changed that and created the conditions you see in that lower image, right? So the things that have happened in that time is, one, the removal of indigenous fire. Indigenous peoples lit frequent fires throughout the West, and for a bunch of reasons: to promote cultural plants, to thin out forests, to create wildlife habitat, to protect their homes. And that was a big part of fire in the landscape. So we removed that around the time of the California gold rush for a lot of the West. But tribes are still out there burning today, just at much lower levels. And so the removal of indigenous fire, there's fire suppression starting in the early 1900s. The federal government adopted policies aimed at pretty much removing fire from these landscapes entirely. And in response to a few really large fire events, we created this fire suppression workforce that still exists today. That's very capable, probably the most capable fire suppression in the world, that has for around 100 years or more kept fire completely out of these places where it was once burning, every 5 to 20 years. So we did those two. There's also different commercial logging. There's a lot of logging that occurred over the last 100, 200 years that removed the larger fire resilient trees from a lot of the landscape, and left a more homogeneous, more even aged landscape behind. So all those things changed the nature of the forest, and then a lot of people moved to Western forest, right? So there's more homes in fire-prone areas, more communities built in the wildland urban interface. So when fires occur, more likely that it's going to be destructive and burn homes down. And then on top of all that, we have climate change. And climate impacts fire in a bunch of different ways, but we know a warmer, drier, more erratic climate. That means extreme weather conditions happening more often, and the kinds of conditions that fuel the fires that happen in Hawaii in this past week are becoming a lot more common. So those things have all created this landscape that we see on the lower end, or sorry, it was 2012, I think I said 2013. And if you compare those two, you see a lot more dense forest canopy, right, in that lower image. It's almost continuous forest across that whole thing. A lot of it's even age, and you can see big areas of dead trees where either bark beetles or drought or just general overcrowding in the forest have created conditions that are super prone to fire, right? So like if on the wrong day, if a fire gets lit in that landscape, it's going to be one big blow up of high severity fire over a lot of it. So next slide. This is the same authors, just a different image from Wenatchee, Washington, near Wenatchee, Washington, 1934 to 2010. This is in kind of a more lower elevation, drier forest, and you can really see all sorts of signs of fire in that upper image, right? There's not even that much forest on that ridge in the foreground, and you can see the impacts of fire exclusion all over that lower image. Next slide. Oh, I lost the thing. Oh, cool. And this is a diagram just describing what I'm talking about. This is from a paper that's cited from Susan Pritchard, University of Washington, in the lower right of the image there. But you can see on the top an active fire regime, right? Sort of thinning out these smaller fuels from the forest, leaving this very open, very diverse forest structure in the middle. And then you can see on the bottom the impacts of fire exclusion, tons of little trees that are densely packed. And if that forest in the bottom was to experience a wildfire, it would almost certainly kill all of the trees in that image. Next slide. Cool. So to talk a little bit about what's being done about this, right? There's a few different kinds of forest management that can change the structure of our forests in a way that makes them more resilient to fire and restores that historic condition that we saw in the photo of Mount Rainier. This is a photo from a drone, also from John Marshall, from the Bootleg Fire in Southern Oregon. This was in 2021. And this was the largest fire in the country at the time. And it provided a pretty cool laboratory for seeing how different types of fuel treatments responded to receiving fire in a really hot, dry part of the year during a drought. So in this image, you see in the background, that's an untreated area that's experienced fire exclusion, like I was just talking about. And then in the foreground, where there's all these green trees, this is an area that's been thinned and prescribed burned. And you can see that in this fire, as the fire moved across that road, it hits this fuel treatment and falls to the ground, and all of those trees are still there. And so that was a successful fuel treatment. And I should say, while we're just talking about this, like there's a few different approaches to dealing with wildfires. Fuel treatments are one of them, and it's one we chose to talk about a lot in our paper because it overlaps a lot with public lands and sort of undeveloped wildlands where we're recreating, right? So there's other things to be done. We need better community planning. We need better, We need to build our homes out of fire resilient materials. We do need to do a bunch of stuff, but on the broader landscape, doing some fuels work through thinning, prescribed fire, and then also managed wildfire, which is allowing certain lightning ignited fires to burn within a pre-contained, pre-planned area while conditions are safe. We need some combination of all of those to help make our forest resilient to fire again. So next slide. And this just shows, yeah, this is from the same fire, the bootleg fire. It shows the same thing with a little more nuance. So on the right, that's a stand that had only been thinned. And you can see some of those trees survived and like it had some effect. On the left, though, you see, again, a combo of like thinning smaller trees and prescribed fire, which remove the fuels from the surface. And that looks a lot more, looks a lot better on the left. Like a lot of that forest will certainly survive. Next slide. And this is a photo that I took from the footprint of the Creek Fire, which was one of the really big ones in California in 2020. This it was on a field trip with the Forest Service. And this is just to illustrate the impacts of large-scale, high-severity fire in a largely untreated landscape, a fire that occurred, I think, Labor Day weekend near Shaver Lake, California, if anyone's ever been there. But almost not a living thing in the entire image, right? Like, and this is just to illustrate high severity wildfire. There's a negative impact to it. There's some high severity, sorry, I should have explained that. That meaning like trees in the forest canopy and vegetation were all killed, or more than 75% were killed. This is a pretty, there's a role for that ecologically in smaller patches, but what we're seeing in modern wildfires where there's been fire exclusion, where we're dealing with climate change, and we're dealing with other things like in this case, bark beetles. A lot of the trees were already killed by bark beetles in this landscape. You see high severity fire over like tens or even hundreds of thousands of acres. And this is an example of that. And it's going to be very hard for a forest to regenerate in this location. And it's really changed a place where a lot of people recreated for a long time. It's still there, but it's just really different. Next slide. Cool. So this is we're getting way into sciencey stuff here, but actually like this is a fire severity map of mega fire, right? And I don't want to spend too much time on this because we're kind of down in the weeds, but these are things you can pull up from the Forest Service for free. This is the King Fire, also in California near Lake Tahoe in 2014. And the only thing I want to point out about this is like, you see there's this map on the right side of the image with red, a spectrum of like red to green, with red being high severity, more than 75% of the vegetation in those areas are killed, and green being between 0 to 25. So that just shows like that this is about 100,000 acre fire, about half of it burned at high severity, which is way outside of the natural range of conditions for forests like this. Next slide. And here's some more like natural fire. This was actually an escape prescribed burn, also near Lake Tahoe, that became the Caples Fire in 2019. And this, you see like the green to red spectrum there makes sort of a mosaic. You can tell that things burn. There is some high severity fire, but it's in smaller patches. There's a lot of green forest left. And actually, like I've been to this fire, that a lot of the high severity was in chaparral and shrubs that are kind of supposed to burn that way. But these maps are cool. They're for free on the Forest Service website. And actually, if anyone's using the onX app for hunting, this is probably your best clue as to what you're going to find on a post-fire landscape. These green areas are going to probably be pretty nice, like, you know, big trees still there, opened up the forest. The other areas are going to be more like that image that I showed earlier of just burned land. I don't know if there is a next slide, but if there is, we can go to it. Cool. So I'll stop there and we can talk a little bit more later about like the takeaways for recreationists in the paper if there's time, but I think Dylan's going to cover some of that anyway, so we'll let him do it.
I won't delve too deep into the weeds. No, it's all good. Yeah, so at this point, like, I guess you're probably wondering why like onX being like a user app, and then Outdoor Alliance and myself, who works on like on the ground with land managers, all spent our time to put together a white paper and do this whole talk and get it out there to people. And it is kind of like a triangular kind of approach to public lands. When I say public lands management, that's like a much broader term than just like the Forest Service or the Bureau of Reclamation. Public lands are equally like, they are just that, they're public. It's like if you go and adopt a dog, like you have to take care of it in equal measure. Like your parents aren't just going to do it for you. And you just get to kind of see it and pet it when you want. So yeah, the report, which, definitely read if you have the time for it. If not, like go through and look at the figures. There's some like really easy on the eyes figures that delve into what Jamie's been talking about. But kind of my point here with impacts on outdoor recreation or focusing on where it comes into end users. And before I dive into kind of how you guys can get involved, whether it's through the onX app or on the ground with local nonprofits, I'll just kind of give you a little bit of background information on like trails, whether you're a hunter, fisher, mountain biker, OHV. When we talk about public lands, which we do throughout this whole report, that's US Forest Service, that's BLM, that's National Park Service. There's about 200,000 miles of trail in the United States that exists. So if you look on onX, wherever else, about 40,000 miles of that are currently considered maintained or like in usable shape. So about a quarter, not quite, about a third of the trails in the United States are currently up to standards of the land managers themselves. And in large part, that's due to wildfire. And in two ways, it's the wildfire burning those trails actively, and it's also the wildfire taking away funding from maintaining and restoring those trails. And that's kind of where I come in and, work on restoring trails in partnership with the US Forest Service or other land managers. It's where Outdoor Alliance comes in with white papers like this that encourage individuals to get involved with government and ask for further funding for recreation and for wildfire fighting itself, for mitigation practices. And it's where onX comes in with getting people engaged with their land managers and educated and giving you guys that opportunity to comment on trail conditions. Land managers can use that, NGOs can use that. It's really key. If you want to pop forward a slide, I think I've got a couple numbers that before I just start throwing numbers at you, you can kind of read them. The photo there on your probably right, maybe your left. That's a photo I took after the Thomas Fire in Santa Barbara, Montecito, 2018-19, with some mudslides that followed it. That landscape was traditionally pretty green. There's a trail that kind of used to go across this stream right where the gal's standing. Obviously pretty charred at this point. That trail was totaled. That's only one of, several hundred fires that took place over like a 5-year period, which is what we mostly studied for this white paper. And those numbers are on the other side of the screen there. So, 5 years, you've got 23,000 plus trail miles that got burnt to pretty high severity. You had nearly 1,500 climbing sites and nearly 2,000 miles of whitewater that's, paddling and fishing. When you start to think across all of that, it's pretty hard to say, like, what does that mean? Is it local to you, or are these just like trail miles or streams in the middle of nowhere? It's easier probably to think of it in like how common wildfire is becoming and how it's impacting your vacations or what you're doing close to home. So I kind of throw that in a big picture. So like since 2000, there's been about 125 million acres of wildfire on forests. That's bigger than the state of California. So no matter how you parse that up and throw it across the United States, it's a lot of land that's been burned. Typically trails that get burnt, rivers that get burnt and culverts get washed out, OHV roads or campgrounds that get burnt, those don't just get fixed immediately. There's countless damages that occur from wildfires. There's homes, structures that get destroyed. There's towns like from the Camp Fire with Paradise in Northern California. There isn't a lot of government money from that. And that's kind of where the other side comes in with what Jamie was talking about a little bit, and with policy and mitigation and the cost of all of this from the government side. But typically wildfire pulls about 1.3 billion for emergency funding for wildfires every year. And that does impact the Forest Service as a whole and like what employees they have. So, 20 years ago, the Forest Service used to have 18,000 employees that were non-wildfire. And today they have about 10 or 11,000. So it's a constantly shrinking amount of employees that are there for trails, for campgrounds, for restoration. And that leads to closures, because if there's no one there to fix it, if there's no one there to take care of it in a general sense, or even watch over for the safety of users, they're going to do nothing except for close it. And that's happened a mass number of times. It happens during active wildfires. It happens during post wildfires. If there's hazard trees, if there's streams that have bridges that are washed out. Unfortunately, the reality is like, you might not be hiking in your favorite place, fishing your local stream, or going to that campground you remember from childhood for, could be 1 year, it could be 5 years. And that money has to come from somewhere, and often it comes from private donations and foundations and grants that go to NGOs. So nonprofits like mine, or like any other trail stewardship in the United States. There's ones for hiking, there's ones for mountain bikers, there's ones for whitewater paddlers. Pretty much every outdoor activity has a method of restoration. That's all private money. You can see how quickly it can benefit some people and hinder others. There's the Western States Trail from the Mosquito Fire, which just happened last year before winter. That was 8 miles of trail that burned on probably one of the most famous running races in the United States. But because that running race has big name sponsors, they were able to accrue about 300,000 private dollars to fix that trail within half a year. If it weren't for $300,000 being gifted by a couple big outdoor brands, otherwise you wouldn't see that trail for 2 to 3 years. That race would not have gone on. So this really is a matter of, even as an individual, you can be advocating with your voice in a number of different ways for funding to public lands. That can be with like local representatives, that can be showing up for volunteer days and taking care of your trails and showing, public land managers that you care, but it can also be supporting companies that give back to public lands that work on education. onX is like a good example. They have a grant stewardship program. They're actively giving money to stewardships on the ground to take care of trails. So it's not like, that's about as good as you can do with just being an outdoor company. You're giving back to your foundation of, what you make your money on. The other big, impacts on outdoor recreation, maybe more so or less about tourism, even though they are about tourism, is that there's a pretty big $13 to $35 billion industry across public lands. It's about 200 to 300,000 jobs that occur directly on national forests. When you have big wildfires like this, you end up with those jobs going away. If you don't have tourism to support guides, no one's coming to stay at hotels in South Lake Tahoe after the Calder fire. No one's going to golf or ride mountain bikes up in Downeyville after the Dixie fire. You have these multi-year economic impacts, and then you also have the health impacts on those local communities. So it's kind of this multifaceted issue, but it's something that all of us, no matter how we recreate on public lands, are actively engaged in. So if you want to pop to the next slide there, give people something fresh to look at. Yeah, this is stewardship, for lack of a better way of putting it. This is repairing part of Santa Cruz Trail. I've been working on this trail for about 4 years now. It burnt back in 2016, and it became usable again legally for the first time about 1.5 years ago. So that's how long it can take. This is a national scenic trail. So it's one of like a very small list of national scenic trails. It holds high value within the government. It was also an IMBA epic. It's probably one of the most popular mountain biking routes in the United States. And even with that, it's hard to get the money to fix that kind of thing. So yeah, you can see with the numbers on the side, about 5% of trail restoration is really handled by the government. The rest is done in partnership with the government through volunteerism. And people don't seem to realize how valuable they are as volunteers. So when you go out, trust us that stewardships, nonprofits, and the government accrue your hours. We take note of it. And there's actually a pretty funny fact to go along with this. It's funny in some ways, but a volunteer hour is worth about $29.60, give or take, in that you're giving back to the government. For 2018, the Forest Service had 666 trail staff for all their forests. there was exactly enough volunteer hours to account for 667 volunteer staff. So the equivalent of one more full-time person was given for free by the public than the government had the money to hire for public lands trails. So it really does matter. Those few hours are the difference between trails being usable for 16 plus million people who visit public lands every year versus not. Yeah, I mean, and restoration comes in all forms. I talk about trails mostly, but of course there's culverts, there's fly fishing, there's OHV areas and campgrounds that need to be restored. There's wetlands and meadows that need to be restored for hunting to come back. It really is like restoration takes on, and stewardship takes on so many different forms. onX has a really good page on stewardship that kind of touches on all the different choices you have depending on your chosen outdoor recreation. I'm sure Matt can just throw that up in the chat for y'all if it's something you're keen on. Is there a slide after this? I think I've got one more, but maybe not. No, I'm good. Yeah, I mean, stewardship is easy. Like, I don't need to make it too complicated on you all. I don't need to go into how bad smoke is for health or, you know, the numbers behind all this. Really, the thing is getting engaged with local organizations. Like I said, I'm Central California coast. I do about San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara to Ventura and Santa Monica. That's a couple million people and 320 miles, and it takes hundreds of volunteers a year to take care of all of that. But if you Google wherever you are, wherever you like to recreate, volunteer hours, you know, throwing dirt, if that's your thing, cool. Giving $20 every year really does go a long way. Becoming a member gives a voice where, you know, you have some leverage on public land managers, and it just shows support for public lands. So yeah, that's not really rocket science. I mean, there's a point to all the fire studies, and it's really getting you all engaged and talking to the public.
Dylan, thank you so much for sharing. And thanks again for all the work that you do on the ground, as well as, you know, fighting for policy.
Cheers.
Sweet. I think the next slide is how to support Outdoor Alliance. And Nicole, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I also want to mention I'm someone who's been super involved in policy for a number of years. And I recently just went on my first work trip in a post-fire landscape, and it really, really opened up my eyes. It was a place that also burned just 3 years ago with the Oregon Timber Trail. So to get to see the landscape function like in its physicality, and then to also know the policy that goes on the back end that we do at Outdoor Alliance, it was a huge eye-opener. And I know a lot of people in this chat have like done cleanups, you're members of Leave No Trace, but there's so many different ways to get involved. Outdoor Alliance is a coalition. I think that a lot of people don't know this. We hold 10 member orgs, including organizations like the Access Fund, American Whitewater, International Mountain Biking Association, shortly known as IMBA, which is where you can find an organization like Dylan, Sage Trail Alliance. And when you become a part of those member orgs, you represent like an incredibly valuable metric that we as Outdoor Alliance get to take to lawmakers, which represents a huge amount of collective power when it comes to policy. Outdoor recreation as a whole is an $862 billion industry. We represent 1.9 of the GDP. So there is this incredible amount of collective power that we can harness as people who are involved and passionate about recreation. All of you being here today is a form of advocacy. I can't believe how many of you guys have stuck through this. Jamie is so smart. We're so happy to have Dylan and onX facilitating this. But from here, there's always ways to take action. Like Dylan said, get involved in volunteering. Also post-COVID, that's super valuable. A lot of these places were short-staffed during COVID, have increased users. It's also just a great place to like find your people. And then online, we always have policy issues that we're working on at Outdoor Alliance. A couple months ago, we had a comment period that was specific to the Forest Service about making places more climate resilient. That comment period has since closed, but we're always working on things like that. And the way that you can stay up to date with that is sign up for our action alerts and our newsletter, the QR code that's set off to the right bottom here. If you scan that with your phone, it'll take you right to our website. And you can also follow along on social media. We're shouting this stuff from the rooftops all the time.
Yeah, and and again, like being part of these organizations too can help amplify your voice. So it's always good to join and to participate and just to stay informed and just know what's going on in your area as well as areas that you love. So sweet. Awesome. So one last time, if you have not yet purchased onX Backcountry, this is your chance. This is a 30% off code that will help you save on your premium or elite membership. And also we're giving away 5 onX Backcountry hats for everyone who stuck around. So if you follow this link right here and just fill out the form, you can be entered to win. Everybody likes free stuff. And then we have a little bit of time here. Do we have any questions? Does anybody want to ask any questions at the end of this presentation? I know there's a lot of information, a lot of different ways this could go. So let's see. Nice. Crickets in the audience. Nice. Well, I guess, yeah, on that note, I think we can, we can kind of tie things up. Again, thanks everybody for joining. Thank you to my esteemed panel here for giving some really, really great information about going beyond just being a hiker or a biker or backcountry skier. It's up to us to steer the direction of where these trails go over the next couple of years and, helping preserve them for generations to come and making sure that our voice is heard in politics. So thanks for everybody. All righty. With that, I think we're going to wrap it up. Thanks for everyone for joining and stay tuned. This will actually be recorded, or it is being recorded, and it'll be up on our YouTube channel where you can also view a lot of other onX Backcountry demos as we dive into a bunch of other issues and topics and route planning. So stay tuned. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.